There was a breakdown nobody could solve. Experts came, technicians struggled, but none succeeded. And that's when the old mechanic waiting quietly in the corner stepped forward. He rubbed his hands together, approached the engine, and what he did left everyone stunned. Welcome to the Real Life Stories. Before we begin this powerful story, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. The vehicle maintenance garage at Fort Campbell military base hummed with activity on that hot Kentucky summer morning. Inside the massive hangar, rows of Humvees, military trucks, and armored vehicles were lined up. Fluorescent lights hung from the ceiling, illuminating every corner. The air smelled of oil, metal, and sweat, a mixture of working hands and powerful machines. The garage atmosphere was always intense. Young technicians in coveralls were running around, shouting orders with repair lists in their hands. The sound of power tools, hammering, and vehicle engines created a constant orchestra. But in the midst of this noisy atmosphere, there was someone working quietly in a corner. Eddie Martinez, 68 years old, was a silver-haired man with a slightly hunched back. He had been working in the same garage for 30 years, but most young soldiers didn't even know his name. They just called him Pops. Every morning he arrived at 6:30, left at 5 p.m. Always the same blue coveralls, always the same greasy cap, always the same old boots. Eddie's workspace was in the farthest corner of the garage. A small workbench, scattered tools, and a chair with years of accumulated oil layers on it. This was his kingdom, but it wasn't very glorious. It was more like a forgotten, overlooked corner. The young technicians were polite but distant toward Eddie. They would say, "Pops, can you handle this?" And he would nod and get to work. He wasn't talkative, wasn't social. He just did his job. Small repairs, simple problems, jobs nobody else wanted. That was Eddie's specialty. But that morning, everything was about to change. Around 8:30 a.m., a heavy truck entered through the garage doors with a loud noise. The driver looked angry, the engine was rattling non-stop, and black smoke was coming from the exhaust. This was Commander Johnson's special command vehicle, and clearly there was a big problem. Tech specialist Carlos Rodriguez, 24 years old, a bright and ambitious engineer, ran to the truck. Carlos had been assigned to Fort Campbell 6 months ago, was a mechanical engineering graduate from Purdue University, and was eager to prove himself. "What's the problem?" asked Carlos, addressing the driver. "I don't know," said the driver, opening the hood. "It was working this morning. Now it's making this noise. The commander has an important meeting in an hour." Carlos looked at the engine. The rattling sound wasn't pleasant. This engine problem looked serious. He rubbed his hands together, pulled out his tools, and got to work. An hour passed. Carlos opened the engine block, examined parts, ran tests. But he couldn't find the problem. The engine was still making the same strange noise. Performance was dropping. Garage workers gathered around Carlos. This truck wasn't just any vehicle. It was the commander's vehicle, and the commander being late for his meeting was unacceptable. "Maybe it's an injector problem," suggested one technician. "No, the fuel system is clean," said Carlos, wiping his forehead. He was sweating. "Could be turbo problems." "I checked. The turbo is working fine." Another technician approached. "Could be an electronic problem." "Did you check the ECU?" Carlos nodded. "I checked everything, but I can't find the problem." It was 9:45 a.m., only 15 minutes left until the commander's meeting. Carlos was panicking. This was his first big test, and he was failing. Garage Chief, Master Sergeant Williams, came over to Carlos. Williams was known as tough, experienced, and impatient. "Rodriguez, what's the situation?" "Chief, I can't find the problem. The engine runs, but performance is low." And this rattling sound, Williams listened to the engine. He frowned. This sound isn't good. The commander will be here in 10 minutes. You need to find a solution. Carlos panicked even more. His hands were shaking. He was dropping his tools. This could end his career. That's when someone slowly approached from the corner of the garage. Eddie Martinez, with greasy rags in his hands, was quietly observing the situation. "What's the problem?" asked Eddie in a calm voice. Williams turned around. Eddie, this engine is broken and we can't fix it. Rodriguez's first big test and—" Eddie said nothing. He approached the engine, lowered his head, and listened. He closed his eyes as if the engine was telling him something. "What's the mileage?" he asked. 125,000 kilometers, said Carlos, still hopeful. Eddie nodded. He looked at the engine more closely. He put his hand on the engine block, as if taking its pulse. When was the last oil change? Carlos checked the files. 3 months ago. What oil? Standard 10W30. Eddie smiled. No, actually, it wasn't a slight smile. This was the smile of someone who knew. "The problem isn't the oil," said Eddie. "The problem is in the timing chain." Carlos was surprised. "Timing chain?" But I checked. There were no signs. Eddie pulled out his key set. These weren't normal keys. They were worn, custom-made tools. Tools used for years, shaped to Eddie's hands. "Sometimes," said Eddie, approaching the engine, "the problem isn't where it appears to be. The timing chain tensioner is stressed. The sound is coming from there." Without even touching the engine yet, Eddie began examining the parts. His hands moved quickly and precisely. Carlos and other technicians were watching him, trying to understand what he was doing. Eddie loosened one part, removed another. His hands seemed to be dancing inside the engine. He never hesitated, never paused. "Look," said Eddie, showing a small metal part. "The tensioner spring is worn. That's why the timing chain is loose. The engine runs, but the timing is off." Carlos took the part and examined it. Indeed, there were wear marks on the spring. "But how did he not see this? How did you notice this?" asked Carlos. Eddie smiled. "If you learn to listen to the engine, it tells you everything." Eddie went to his workbench, pulled out a new spring from there, but this wasn't a normal spring. Eddie had modified this part, strengthened it. "Where do they sell this?" asked Carlos. "They don't sell it," said Eddie. "I made it." The next 15 minutes, Carlos watched Eddie as if he was performing magic. Eddie's hands danced in the engine, every movement precise and effective. He removed parts, cleaned them, reinstalled them. He wasn't in a hurry, but he wasn't wasting time either. And finally, Eddie started the engine. The sound had changed. There was no rattling. The engine was running perfectly. Carlos couldn't believe it. "How is this possible? You solved in 15 minutes what I couldn't solve in 2 hours. Eddie wiped his hands with the rag. "Experience," he said simply. Just then, Commander Johnson entered through the garage door. His uniform was spotless, his posture straight, his face showing urgency. "Is my vehicle ready?" he asked. William stepped forward. "Yes, sir." Eddie solved the problem. The commander looked at Eddie. For the first time, he was really looking at him. "Eddie, right? You've been working here for a long time." "Yes, sir, 30 years. "Good job," said the commander. "Thank you." The commander got in his vehicle and left. But something had changed in the garage. Carlos and other technicians were looking at Eddie differently. "Eddie," said Carlos, "where did you learn these things?" Eddie returned to his workbench. "I worked in the Army Corps of Engineers, 25 years. Carlos was surprised. "Corps of Engineers? Which unit?" "Engineering Battalion, Heavy Equipment Division." "What kind of work did you do?" Eddie hesitated. "Bridges, roads, airstrips, infrastructure during wartime." "Which wars?" "Vietnam, Gulf, Bosnia, beginning of Afghanistan." Carlos held his breath. "That means you were—" "I was a combat engineer," said Eddie. "But now I'm just a mechanic." From that day on, the atmosphere in the garage changed. Carlos stood by Eddie's side every chance he got, asking questions, trying to learn from him. Eddie was initially cool, but gradually began to open up. One lunch break, Carlos approached Eddie. "Eddie, those modified parts you make, where did you learn this?" Eddie raised his head. During wartime, you can't find standard parts. You learn to make your own parts or you die. Tell me about it. Eddie paused for a long time. Then he began to speak. 1991, Gulf War. Our unit was building roads in Iraq for military convoys. We had heavy equipment, bulldozers, graders, cement trucks. Carlos listened carefully. There was an enemy attack. Several of our machines were damaged. No spare parts. We couldn't wait for reinforcements. Because if the road wasn't finished, the convoy couldn't pass. What did you do? I did the impossible. I took parts from other vehicles, modified them, redesigned them. I worked 48 hours and got all the machines working. Carlos was impressed. By yourself? With my team. But the designs were mine. Is this story in the files? Eddie smiled. Most of it is classified. But I have some medals. That evening, Carlos went home but couldn't stop thinking about Eddie. The next morning, he came early and waited for Eddie. Eddie, I'm going to ask you a question. Ask, why are you here in this garage? I mean, with your skills, you could have been an engineer, you could have been an instructor. Eddie thought for a long time. Because here nobody expects anything from me. I just do my job. Go home. Simple. But, Carlos, said Eddie, turning to him, during wartime I made life and death decisions every day. Soldiers crossing the bridges I designed, using the vehicles I repaired. If I made a mistake, people died. Carlos understood. Now, Eddie continued, I just repair vehicles. Nobody's life is in my hands. This gives me peace. But you're very talented. You could teach these things. Eddie nodded. Maybe. But I'm already teaching. I'm teaching you. In the following weeks, Carlos continued learning from Eddie. Not just technical skills, but philosophy too. How to listen to problems, how to be patient, how to be effective without being perfectionist. One day, there was a big emergency in the garage. 2 large trucks had collided. Both were heavily damaged. But the unit was going to an important exercise the next day. All technicians were trying to repair both vehicles at the same time, but progress was slow, parts were complex, damage was serious. Carlos stepped forward. Eddie, we need your help. Eddie looked up. I only do small repairs. No, said Carlos. You're an engineer. This is your specialty. Eddie hesitated. Then he stood up. The next 12 hours, Eddie led the team. He had a plan. He had strategy. Which parts to take from which vehicle, how to modify them, in what order to do them. Carlos watched Eddie. This was no longer the quiet mechanic. This was Leader Eddie, Command Eddie. They worked until midnight, and by morning, both vehicles were in perfect working condition. Commander Johnson visited the garage. This is incredible. How did you accomplish this? Williams pointed to Eddie. Under Eddie's leadership, sir. The commander looked at Eddie. Now there was a different look. Eddie, I need to review your file. These skills are being wasted. Eddie nodded. Sir, I'm satisfied with my current situation. Are you sure? I could make you an instructor, give you more responsibility, Eddie thought. He looked at Carlos, then at the other young technicians. If you want, said Eddie, I can give special training on weekends, advanced mechanical skills, but only those who want can come. Carlos immediately stepped forward. I want to! The other technicians also nodded enthusiastically. And so Eddie's new life began. He still worked in the same garage, still the same quiet mechanic. But now he became a teacher on weekends. In the first lesson, Eddie told Carlos and the others, engineering isn't just mathematics. Listening to machines is an art. Understanding what they're telling you requires patience. Carlos asked, what's the most important lesson? Eddie smiled. Don't look for the perfect solution. Make a working solution. During wartime, good enough saves lives. Perfect is a waste of time. Months passed. Carlos and other technicians began creating miracles with the techniques they learned from Eddie. Difficult situations coming to the garage were no longer problems. One day, there were high-ranking generals visiting the garage. They were examining Fort Campbell's efficiency. This garage's performance is extraordinary, said a general. What's the secret? Commander Johnson pointed to Eddie. We have that man, Eddie Martinez. 30 years of experience, infinite knowledge. The general approached Eddie. Soldier, what's your background? Combat engineer, sir, 25 years active. Which operations? Eddie listed operation names. The general's eyes widened. I was in some of those operations. Were you in bridge construction in the Persian Gulf? Yes, sir. That bridge changed the course of the war. Did you design it? Eddie nodded. The general turned around. This man is a treasure. I'll write a report to the Pentagon. But Eddie didn't interfere. He just smiled, returned to his workbench, and continued his work. Carlos approached him. Eddie, do you realize how important you are? Eddie wiped his hands with the rag. Carlos, I already know I'm important. But being important doesn't mean being loud. What do you mean? The most important work is done quietly. The most valuable people don't wait to be noticed. I do my job, you learn. That's enough. That night, Carlos thought at home. Eddie was right. Real value is created quietly. The most powerful work happens behind the scenes. Now everything was different in the garage. Eddie still worked in the same corner, still the same modest lifestyle. But now everyone knew who he was, and Eddie continued teaching. Not just mechanical skills, but life philosophy. How to stay humble, how to be effective, how to serve. Sometimes real heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they wear greasy coveralls, have dirty hands, and work in garages. Eddie Martinez was one of them. Someone who served quietly for 30 years, ready to share his knowledge, but never seeking attention. So I ask you, have you ever met someone like this? Someone who appeared ordinary on the surface but had extraordinary skills? Share their stories in the comments, because at the Human Stories, we spotlight unsung heroes. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe. People like Eddie Martinez deserve recognition. Their silence deserves to be heard. See you in the next story. And remember, sometimes the most powerful engines run quietly.